Okay, it looks like we're settled at least enough to get started. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Ha Huang, and I'm with ESSEC Business School. I'd like to welcome you to this digital disruption, a look at industries and their futures. I'm really pleased to have this distinguished panel that we have today. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to share your expertise and insights with us. I'm going to very quickly provide you with a brief overview of the panelists, and the hardest part of doing this is to reduce their CVs to 2 or 3 lines, so I apologize. But let me get started. Nancy McKinstry is the CEO of Wolters Kluwer, a company with a 175-year history in publishing. And since 2003, she's led the company's transformation from print to digital, and now on to software solutions and services for legal, medical, accountancy, and finance professionals. Pierre Pelletot is leading the digital transformation practice in France. His experience is in advising clients in technology and consumer and retail industries. Annabelle Gawer is professor of digital economy at University of Surrey. She's the author of 2 widely held read books on platforms and has produced a number of research articles on the topic. And she has a 3rd book she's working on right now, which will be titled The Business of Platforms. And particularly of interest to us is that Annabelle has also provided input on the issue of regulation of digital platforms in Europe, so we might be hearing more from her about that. And finally, Rashik Parmar is a technical executive with IBM and is an IBM Distinguished Engineer. Rashik helps clients with their cloud innovation roadmaps and has expertise in manufacturing, financial, and retail industries. He also has a foot in our world. He's an adjunct professor in Imperial College Business School. So I'd like to welcome you all. I've asked each of you to talk for about 10 minutes to give us your particular take on the promise and challenges of digital disruption. So I'll start with Nancy. The floor is yours.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to participate today. It's really a pleasure to be here. Just to give you the context of my remarks, let me tell you a few things about Wolters Kluwer. The company's 181 years old. We started as a publishing company many, many years ago. We serve professionals in the fields of health, tax and accounting, legal and regulatory, and financial services. And market cap is about 13 billion. Revenues are about 4.5 billion. We're a public company traded on the AEX in the Netherlands, but more than 60% of our revenues come from the US. We operate in about 180 countries around the world. So I've been the CEO since the fall of 2003, and when I took over, the company was really at a critical moment because the internet had really disrupted the media business, and we as a company, frankly, weren't particularly prepared. So what did we have to do? So at that moment, about 70% of our revenues came from printed information. Today, just to fast forward, 90% of our revenues are digital. So in that period of time, we had to make this, significant move from analog to digital. So what did it take? First and foremost, it took portfolio changes. So we sold about 1 billion euros of revenue of non-core businesses, and conversely, we bought about 1.3 billion of companies that gave us technology skills, which we did not have, so we needed those skills. Also gave us very good positions in market segments that we could then build around to get the leading share position. So portfolio was critical. Second thing that was absolutely, when I look back, I would say the most important decision we made as a team was to start a program of internal innovation. So we reinvest 8 to 10% of our revenues back in new and enhanced products. And we did that even in the global financial crisis because that is the core of being able to drive innovation and organic growth in this industry. And then the third thing we needed to do was really shift from a product company to a customer company. We really didn't understand always how our customers used our products. And so that became a very important part of the mission. So if I look today, that initial sort of transformation has been successful. The market cap of the company's tripled over the last decade or so. So now where do we go? And I'm really excited about the next transformation, which is to become an expert solution company. So that is building software tools that our customers can use every day to get a defined benefit, whether it's automating some of their work, increasing their productivity, increasing their accuracy as a professional. So today, about 50% of our revenues come from these kinds of expert solutions. We want to grow that to 65 or 70%. So what is it now going to take to do that? I would say portfolio is less important. We have really strong market positions, so we don't have to buy anything. We can choose to buy some things that might accelerate the next wave of transformation, but we can still do it organically. So what is really important is innovation. As you all know, technology innovation is the pace of that is, grown exponentially. So we really need to not only keep the investment from a capital perspective going, but also get better and more agile with innovation. Second thing is go to market. What I have found is when you're selling these much more complex solutions, you really have to have enhanced go to market, and we really have to guide our customer. I'll give you an example. We've had cloud-based solutions in the marketplace for about 7 or 8 years now. We're a leader in many of our markets with cloud. And today, if you look at how long we think it's going to take our on-premise customers into the cloud, we expect 15 or 20 years. So what does that mean? That means we have to be smart enough to keep these dual investments going, still invest in sort of the foundation or the legacy products, at the same time build the new, and really help our customers make that leap. That's all about go-to-market. So that becomes much, much more important for our future. And then the last thing is partnerships. I'm sure that you all study and talk to your own students and clients about the notion of these ecosystems. Well, that is real, and it's very complex, I think, for most companies to really figure out, when can you act as a hub and attract people into your ecosystems, when do you want to be a spoke in somebody else's ecosystem, and how do you really go to market and talk to your customers about that? So I think partnerships will be much more important to our future than the past. So last thing I'll just say, keep me honest on time here, is what do we get excited about in terms of new technologies? I would say that cloud and mobility have already disrupted the world, and so those are already a big part of our mix. What we're focused on in the future is really things around robotic process automation is really important in our market, artificial intelligence, and natural language processing. So I'll give you a quick example. Think about this. The company's 181 years old, right? So think about now the things that we have to develop. Really quick example. We serve the accounting market. We're one of the biggest players in the accounting market around the world. So we sell information and software. So the US, we're the leader in the professional accounting space. So what is one of the biggest challenges accountants have? A new rule comes out from the IRS, and they have to figure out, well, what does it mean? How do I tell my clients about it? And how do I identify my clients that are actually affected by it? So today, most accounting firms actually have people that go in and look at tax returns when a new rule comes out to figure that out. Well, as you might imagine, very inefficient, not very accurate, and costs them a lot of money. So we just launched this product into beta in the last couple months, where it basically, you have to buy our information and you have to buy our software, and the product's name is CCH IQ, and it sits on top of that. So what does it do? Today, we push out an alert to an accountant. It says there's a new ruling from the IRS. The accountant pushes a button, and we have all these algorithms and bots that go out and scan all the client returns and pull back the clients that are affected by that new ruling. Accountant pushes the button again, an email goes out to those clients, say, hey, there's been a new change, you need to come into the office, or we need to talk about it. So what does that do for the accountant? First of all, it's very accurate, much more accurate than the human beings that were doing it. So they can redeploy those people to do other things, so they save time and money. And finally, it helps them generate business, because these clients have to come in and interact with their accountant. So that's just an example about how our world is changing and how these new technologies can really advance the value that we bring to bear. So that's our future.
Thank you. What I failed to mention that the audience has a role to play in this as well, because we'll have presentations by our panelists, but we'll open it up to Q&A. I'll hold the Q&A for now, and I'll just pass it on to Pierre.
Thanks, Hal. So as Hal was mentioning earlier, I'm a consultant. So I lead our digital transformation practice at Strategy N, which is part of PwC. Some of you, I'm sure, know about that. And so Nancy talked to us about the B2B transformation. I'm going to focus more on the B2B and B2C side. And you cannot think about digital disruption, how it's disrupting whole industries, without looking at data, without looking at the future of data. And I think looking at the future of data can maybe help us, cut through the fog, as was mentioned earlier. So what is data going to look like in a couple of years from now, in 2025? So this is not, something groundbreaking. It's just some data from IDC. But I think it's interesting to look at this data. The first thing to notice is that data is growing exponentially. This is nothing new. You know that if you look at the chart on this slide. But what's more interesting is if you dig inside of what that data is going to look like. Well, the first characteristic is criticality. So 20% of all this data going to be produced in 2025 is going to be critical for our lives, for our daily lives. So this could be, hypercritical data, like data that controls the autonomous car that you're being driven in. So if there's a data failure, that can be, costly for your life. But it's also data on, for example, managing airports, managing railway systems, managing electric grids. Right? If this data is not there, then we'll have problems, managing these life-critical systems. Second thing is omnipresence. So today we interact with digital devices about a couple of hundred times a day. Well, in 2025, it's going to be almost 5,000 times a day. That's once every 18 seconds, each one of us is going to interact with a piece of going to generate data with a piece of digital software, digital hardware. Third thing is real time. So over 25% of the data that's going to be produced is going to be real time, and it's going to lose its value as soon as it's produced. So for example, to drive an autonomous car, you need to be able to use that data real time. It's no use to use it 10 seconds later. So 25% of all the data that's going to be produced is going to be real time. The next thing that is interesting is there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence. And I'm sure we're going to talk probably about that with our IBM colleague. Today, the amount of data that's analyzed by algorithms, cognitive algorithms, is very small. It's going to be multiplied by 50 by 2025. And it's going to represent a very small fraction of the total data that's produced, only 5 zettabytes out of the 163 zettabytes that are going to be produced. And the last thing is security. So estimates show that about 90% of all the data produced will have a need for some form of security, cybersecurity, but only half of the data is going to be secure. So there's a big issue around cybersecurity of data. So this gives you a bit of a view of what data is going to look like in 2025. And whenever anybody sees an exponential curve, obviously it attracts a lot of attention, and a lot of people want to be part of that game. So a lot of companies now are rushing towards this goal to create data throws for themselves. So let's take a look at that. So if you look at all the data that's produced, if you take the data produced in 2016, 16 zettabytes, about 10% of that is data that was stored. A lot of data is not stored, right? It's produced and it just disappears, right? A lot of data is stored. It's about 10% of that. But not all of it is stored in data centers. A fraction of that is stored in data centers. You have data on your phone, on your PC, in CD-ROMs when you look at movies, for example. So there's a lot of data that is not stored in data centers. And of the data that is stored in data centers, only a fraction of that is concerning humans, is produced by humans. So it's about 0.2 zettabytes out of that. So it's about a factor of 1 to 80 from all the data that is produced worldwide. That is stored in data centers, and by whom? What's interesting is that when you look at it, the single most important company that controls the data that we produce as humans is Google. And now Google doesn't produce any data on this. You have to really look at the amount of data centers they have, the electricity consumption they have, the capex they spend on data centers. And you look at their core network, their backbone network, and you can figure out that they control about 1/4 of all the data that is produced by humans worldwide. They store on their servers. Now, if you do simple math, you get, out of the 60 gigabytes by human, by internet user, right, about 14 are stored on data centers by Google. And the next closest competitor is Facebook, that has only a very small fraction of that. Right? It has only 0.3 gigabytes per human. Now, this is a number which you need to take with caution because it's a simple average. Obviously, an African will not have as much data as a European. And it's also not an accurate number in the sense that a lot of this data is videos, for example, that are produced on YouTube, right? Not necessarily just data collected by humans. But still, 1/4 of all the data that is stored worldwide is controlled by Google. Now, what is interesting is when you start to look at what is behind that, and Google provides some tools for you to go out and look at the data that they collect on you. It's called Google Takeout. If you're interested, you can go out and download all the data that Google has on you. And if you start to do that, and some people have done that, some software developers, well, you find out that Google has every place that you've been where you've used Google Maps, and it's tracked for the past 10 years. They've kept track of it. So you can actually look on a global map where you've been for the past 10 years because Google tracks it. They have everything that you've ever searched, obviously, right? They have everything that you've ever looked at on YouTube. They have your advertisement profile, right? The things you like, the things you don't like. They have every app and extension that you've used on your Android phone, for example. All your calendar events, all the photos that you've taken, right, on your phone, and all of your email history if you use Gmail, right? All of that is stored and kept on the servers of Google. Impressive amount of data. Similarly for Facebook, right? They also collect a lot of data on you. And Facebook is actually quite smart. They know that they don't have a lot of data, even though they're the second biggest player. So they actually find smart ways to collect data when you use other applications. So for example, if you log into an e-commerce website and you log in using Facebook ID, well, Facebook is going to keep track of the activity you have on that website. Right? So and they use that to get more data on you about your profile, about your likes, and so on. And Facebook is actually also buying data from data brokers because they think we don't have enough data, so we want to have data on the socioeconomics of the people we have on Facebook and so on, so that we can better target the advertising. So this is all the data that is being controlled today is being controlled by Google, by Facebook, and we don't have the Chinese players there. I'm sure they're pretty big as well when you get down to it. But this shows you that some companies are trying to create data silos where they collect as much data as possible because they think that's going to be the future that's going to disrupt everybody. And this obviously is going to grow between now and 2025, 10 times in terms of data, but also divided by 2 because there are 2 times more internet providers, internet users are going to be there in 2025. Now, what does this mean? Well, this means that these companies are trying to control the data services that are being provided to us as humans. But the real value, it doesn't come from data that is contained into silos. The real value is going to emerge when we're able to cut across different silos. And these are healthcare examples that are actually real. So for example, a car and Parmar example, there's a German automotive company that is working with a large pharma company to see what can we do if we collect data from people using their steering wheel, using the gas pedal, the brake pedal on their cars. Can we get information out of that is useful for the pharma company? And actually there is. If you collect that data, you analyze it, you can actually determine if the driver is going to be likely to get early onset of Parkinson's, for example. And that actually is quite valuable for this pharma company because they can target that user, tell him in advance that we have this wonderful drug. If you start to take it now before Parkinson's actually gets worse, you're going to be much better. Right? So there's a lot of value for the pharma company to be able to get the data from the automotive company to be able to provide a useful service to an end user. And similarly, if you look at healthcare providers, your doctor has a lot of information on you. If it's provided to a company where you do your shopping, like Carrefour, for example, in France, well, you could get alerts saying, hey, don't buy this butter, and maybe you should buy this butter because it's better for you, right? So there's a lot of things you can start to imagine if you cut across the data silos that are being hoarded by a few digital companies. And the holy grail out of this is the creation of a digital twin of the real world. Right? So if you start to collect all the data that is collected from people, from cars, from traffic lights, from trains, from weather, etc., you can create a digital image, a digital copy of the real world, and start to build services out of all that information. And this term digital twin, comes from General Electric on the B2B side. They do that for their machines, but you can also imagine that for the real world. And once you have that, then you can start creating all sorts of services which become really useful for everyone. But in order to get there, there's a way to go, right? And how can we get from here where we are today to that state in the future? Well, we believe we need to solve what we call data pain points. And data pain points, there's two types. There's data pain points for us as providers of data, and these are obviously privacy. We state one survey here, but there's plenty that say that users care a lot about their data privacy, and we heard a lot about that in recent months, with the different scandals that different companies have been involved with. And the second thing is ownership. And there's a lot of people now that believe that people who produce their data should have actually some ownership rights on their data and get value out of that data. And there's a very, very interesting paper that's been written by some economists in Berkeley and Chicago that says, should we treat data as labor? And I invite you to look at that article. And the basic precept says that, well, if you reproduce data that is useful for a company that creates value out of it, we should actually have ownership rights on that data. And therefore, perhaps we should also get a benefit from that data. And this is also an interesting survey that was done by the Washington Post a few months ago when Facebook was in the middle of the Cambridge Analytica scandal. They asked their readers, well, would you be willing to pay to have a version of Facebook that would be provided to you free of advertising? Pay $1, $5, $7, $15. And in order for Facebook to be in its money, they would have to be able to pay. They would have to pay $15 per user in the US, so that Facebook would have the same amount of money it makes from advertising. So 42% of customers said, yes, I would be willing to pay, not as much as 15 in most cases. But they would be willing to pay for a version of Facebook that would not have advertising. But the more interesting fact I found in that survey was that 42% of people said, well, actually, I would like to be paid by Facebook for the data that I'm providing Facebook and for the targeted advertising that they're providing to me. So we believe these pain points on the people would be the ones that we need to solve for people to willingly share their data in the future. And on the other side, you want to have companies who create services out of this data. What are their pain points? Well, the first one is authenticity. You want to be able to verify the authenticity of the data that is being provided to you. For example, in the healthcare example I gave before, you want to be able to make sure it's the right person that is providing you that data. Second one is availability. We mentioned that 25% of the data that's being produced is real time. So you have to make use of it immediately, so it has to be available to you. And finally, aggregation, right? So being able to cut across different silos, so not having Google own everything, not having Facebook own everything, but having the means to get that data from the different silos, cutting across it to create value from all that data. And the last point that sits in the middle of all of this is security, which is one of the major concerns of CEOs, as we show in our survey every year. Security is at the center of all of this, right? So in our view, if we're able to solve these 7 data pain points, then we are on a path to creating this digital twin of the real world and being able to unlock the value of data across all industries.
Everybody hear me well in the back? Yeah, great. Thank you. It's a great privilege to be here. And I'm not shy about public speaking, but I'm actually feeling sort of a little bit jittery because I think it's, you guys are my profession, right? So I really respect, almost all the people here, I would say. And therefore, it's a bit humbling to be here in a distinguished panel to speak about a really big topic on which we don't have great theories yet. So I want to make a couple of points, and hopefully that will be stimulating to you. The first one is trying to look at where we are in historical time in this so-called digital disruption or digital revolution. And to think in the past, when was the last time that the world experienced such a momentous change in the way means of productions were radically transformed? And I think it's fair to say, and I'm not the first person to say that the Industrial Revolution was a big one, right? And to a large extent, if we look at the landscape of the industries that we have around us, they have been shaped to a large extent by the new possibilities of value creation that came out of the technological change associated with the Industrial Revolution. And if we think about the work of Alfred Chandler, or Scale and Scope, Chandler's main point was that the modern corporation, as we know it, which as a society of strategic management scholars is the main object of our study, the firms and the industries, they really were born out of the Industrial Revolution, and in particular how the concentration of production power led to the emergence of firms. Okay? And we know that the firms that had, economies of scale, economies of scope, were able to survive and to continue to concentrate, not only just market power, but they were more efficient, they had a competitive advantage, and so on and so on. So today with digital, we also have new ways to create value. As everybody has said, we are now part of an interconnected fabric that covers the whole world. There are huge amounts of processing power capabilities in terms of data processing. We had a whole discussion about data, data, zeros and ones, a way to reduce the world to numbers that are easily processed, computed, made sense of, interpreted, and that facilitates a new way to transact, a new way to buy and sell, a new way to find buyers and sellers in these online platforms or online marketplaces of today, which have the reach of the whole world, as opposed to, we used to have markets always, it was on Sunday morning in front of the church in the village square. That's nothing new. But we have a way to do that now through these online transaction platforms. We also innovate in different ways. A lot of people have access to software tools. There are some standardized software developments and tools and environments. And we are now in a world where, adolescents from India or China or anywhere else can create really cool software. And again, I'm going to use the word platforms again. You have technological building blocks such as an Apple iOS or a Google Android, which are technological operating systems which have exposed connectors and free training. And then what we see is that the generation of products and technologies and services happens in a much more fragmented way, in a way that everybody could contribute. Isn't that wonderful? Right? When I started my PhD at MIT in 1994, the explosion of the internet, this was a very exciting time. We were very excited about the possibilities of breaking back the old structures and doing it right this time, and democratizing innovation, and everybody could have a voice, and everybody can be a publisher, and there was a sort of undercurrent of a fairer future. And for those of you who know my work, I've been working in the area of platforms since my PhD thesis. Probably informed because I was a telecom engineer for a few years before then. Where are we now today? It's a bit sad, isn't it? What we see is that actually, far from having the democratized, let 1,000 flower blooms, we're all connected, we're all in this together, we see that, yes, that's true, value is being created in ways that were never possible before by lots and lots of people. But in strategy, we think about value creation and also value capture. And we're sort of waking up from this dream, and we're sort of thinking, okay, so how does the value capture actually happen? And people get excited about data and I really liked your presentation, but
Yes.
we, who is the we? We can tap into, if only we are across silos. Oh, Google is keeping all this value, but what really matters is how it's across silos. Google seemed to be doing pretty well last time I checked.
Oh yeah.
Right. So value is definitely being created and captured within the Google silo. They're doing just fine.
Yeah.
They're not the one who say, oh, let's just share.
No.
Everybody else who comes, I'm sure that they're not asking you how to make digital business. Everybody else is. They come to you, and of course you can tell them, we all need to work across silos, right? However, being strategy scholars, we also understand about divergent incentives, right? And let me tell you a story about divergent incentives. About 300 years ago, there was a new technology that was born. Big ships with big sails that could cross oceans. Now, that was a game changer. You could do international trade. You could go from Europe to the new continent. But it took 100 years before that business actually took off. Why was that? They had the ships, the technology was there. What was missing is that, and I need to go a bit into the detail for you to understand the difficulty. What was missing was a way for the different people who had cargo to put on the ship to agree on what would happen once you hit a storm, as sometimes you do. The way that ships survive the storms is that you had to throw away some cargo in the sea. Usually you needed more than one operator to put their cargo. So you want to send your spices, you want to send your oil, and I want to send my tiles, right? And we all are putting our bundles on the ship. Most of the ships went down because not just of the storm, but because of the fights that were happening within the sailors, which had been paid individually by the three different cargo shippers, to say, if there is a storm, throw away the bundles of the other guy. And so it took a while for people to realize that there was a way to write some sort of contracts where they would put their destinies together, and they would say, okay, we're going to have to throw away some bundles, but the benefits of the whole enterprise is going to be calculated on the basis of whatever's left, and that's being sold, we all share that equally. So that's a way to align the incentives and find the right institutional arrangements that allow this cooperation to happen, and cooperation in a situation of risks and in a situation of, the coalition is going to break down. So where we are now is we are realizing that value capture around digital is done in a very concentrated way by platforms such as Google or Facebook or Amazon. We're still, some of us, very happy to enjoy all the free goodies we're getting, and certainly I can't live without my mobile phone, and I wouldn't want to go back, and we're all there, right? But if we want to think about, as scholars, what kind of questions we should be looking at, very precisely, over the last 30, 40 years, we've been looking at two objects. Firms, which again we have inherited from the previous industrial revolution, and industries, which is the environment in which these firms operated. And, and we've all taught Porter 5 forces, and you start with the industry, and industry had a sort of a stable feel about it. You were in the paper industry, you were in the bloody paper industry, Now, with Amazon going seamlessly from one industry to the next, not to repeat a cliche, but the borders of these industries seem to be much more porous. And so I would say that we're moving away from firms and industries to the new organizational form of the digital era, which is going to be platforms and ecosystems. And if you just have a cursory look at the top 10 companies in the world today, 7 of them are platforms. So we need to understand better how platforms grow. We need to understand better how ecosystems operate. We need to think about what do we want ecosystems to be. We need to understand these types of questions. Just one more thing. And so that's, I think, a big question that we have. I'm now happy to start advising the European Commission on issues around regulation around online platforms. And to just echo what David Teese was saying, we actually have a bit of a responsibility here. I think if all we keep doing is to basically help companies make a little bit more money, and there's a ton of companies out there who are very, very worried, and rightly they are, as to, how do I react to these existing threats? And that's perfectly valid, and I've just finished writing a book that's gonna, hopefully, with Mike Cosumano and David Yoffe, The Business of Platforms, which hopefully will help managers think strategically in those terms. But also, we need to think in a systemic way as to what kind of firms we want to have, what kind of responsibilities we want to have firms to take, and what kind of structure of the rules we want to put in place to make sure that the original promise of the digital disruption doesn't turn into a nightmare. And the digital twin to me gave me a bit. It made me think about the Matrix. This alternative world that is digital. That of course we can create all sorts of fantastic services. Again, who is the we? But mostly, and I don't want to be panicking everybody. We are reducing to data, which is processable, transmittable, monetizable. Other things which, and maybe, I guess I want to finish on this. We all know what we're gaining. I think we should be focusing more on what we might be losing if we're not mindful of it. And I think that if we think about humans versus machines, I think that up until now, we were all pretty relaxed that the machines we have around us are there to help us. Yes, some people lost their jobs, but they were miners, and, I'm not a miner. I'm a knowledge person, So we didn't feel quite directly threatened by all of that. And I think we need to think about what are the human activities that we want to make sure don't get messed up by these wonderful digital disruptions. And we want to make sure we want to keep some social processes and where we organize collective entities such as firms or maybe other types of entities that protect the values that we want to protect. And I think we need to be very mindful of these questions, which might be maybe a bit outside of the remit of what we usually did. But again, to echo what David Teese had to say, either we're relevant or we're not. And I think what the choice is we have to be relevant and we have to be responsible. And these are very important issues. And I just want to say we have a big job to do. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Rashik.
So I want to pick up on Annabelle's point about being relevant and valuable. So I want to put yourselves into the feet of or the shoes of a senior executive in a business, like Nancy, for example, who's looking at a flip chart with the term digital disruption written on the top. And the rest of it's blank. And you ask yourself, what am I going to do? Because, Pierre and I face that problem day in, day out. Because, a CEO will say, you and you, next week, I want you to go and innovate. I want to come and tell me about digital disruption next week, please. Right? And all of a sudden, they have to respond to this quite challenging question. And so the way I start to think about this is say, we've got to give some practical tools and guidance to senior managers who are facing this very difficult problem. Because actually, nobody knows what the future is. we can all guess, is it digital twin? Is it the Matrix? Is it doomsday? We're all, there's all these scenarios that our heads get filled up by science fiction and all the fiction writers out there. But how do we put some real practical, sensible guidance in place? And I think that's what people are looking for. So let's start with what I think are the 5 fundamental patterns for how digital disruption actually takes place. So the first one is very simple. Physical product, if you attach sensors and connectivity to it and put some compute power inside that product, you take that product from being a static, inanimate object into something that's smarter, right? And you create the ability to create new interactions with that product when it's left your factory gates. And that gives you the opportunity to create new services, smarter car, connected home, all that stuff. So that's one atomic pattern. It's about augmenting products with technology to create new interaction patterns. The second pattern says anything that a person does, we can use robotic process automation, we can use different forms of AI, and we can start to codify what they do into some form of software, and we can replace them over time. And that allows us to create new levels of productivity, creates new kinds of digital platforms and new interaction models. The third pattern says any value chain that spans multiple organizations, the data is kept across those organizational boundaries. It's never actually brought together. By creating trusted data sources, whether in the form of blockchain or other forms, we're able to unify that data, find the inefficiencies, and start to create efficiencies across that and create new interaction patterns, a platform, if you will, across the boundaries. The fourth pattern says, if I gather a pool of data, I can sell that pool of data as new, valuable, tradable asset. And Google does that very well as advertising data. There's many people who do a whole range of different interactions. Vodafone, for example, sells high-resolution traffic data as an exhaust because they just happen to know where the mobile phones are and where they're moving, and they sell that as data to TomTom and satellite navigation manufacturers as well. And the final pattern says, creating a digital representation of a physical asset allows us to create new interaction patterns. And a digital twin, if you like, allows us to create new kinds of interactions. So that's a bit more abstract. Let me bring that one to life with the example of Uber. Okay? So if you phone a taxi company a few years ago and said, I want a taxi to go from A to B, the person at the other end would say, that taxi is going to come in 10 minutes. You as a consumer knew at best that was a guess. At worst, it was a complete lie. Right? Because that taxi may come in 5 minutes, may come in 20 minutes, may come in half an hour. You have absolutely no idea. Okay? What Uber did is said, if I can create a digital representation of that taxi on an app so you can see where that taxi is, and if I can show you the traffic patterns and I can estimate the time, and you can see the progression, all of a sudden you get confidence in that estimate of 10 minutes or 9 minutes. Right? And so what you start to understand is a lot of this digital disruption is about creating certainty where uncertainty exists. Okay? And that certainty is the value that you're trying to capture. And then as you start to think more about this, you start to realize there are 3 fundamental laws of digitization. Okay? And the first law says that if it can be digitalized, somebody will find a way of doing it. Blindingly obvious, but that happens, right? The second law, which is the one that nobody wants to talk about, is when it gets digitalized, its value tends to free. And that's the part which you kind of say, whoa, what do you mean? So we've been doing that for the last 70 years of the digital industry, and we've just been kind of not talking too much about it because it's about jobs, it's about people's lives, and we don't want to talk about it, but actually that's what we've been doing. If I go into Chicago and look at a banking hall where thousands of people used to write accounts, their jobs no longer exist. Right? We can go inside mines and see people who used to mine inside deep mines, and all of a sudden those jobs no longer exist. So progress is about some form of digitalization of activity and finding new value. And so I think we have to help understand where that new labor is going to come from. It's not an industrial era. maybe it's a marketplace era, maybe it's a platform era. We don't have those words. And one of the challenges I give to you all is, let's form some new words and not call it industrial strategies, as the UK government is doing, because that's about recreating the past rather than creating the future that we want to be part of. But there are some fundamental skills that we think need to exist. And let me just summarize those in 5 fundamental skills. And I give them cute animals because it helps understand those skills. And it's all about the third law of digitization. And the third law of digitization says that it's the data and what you do with that data which allows you to create new value. Right? So anything that can be digitized will be digitized. When it gets digitized, it becomes free. The data from digitization is your path to new value. So how do you get that new value? The first thing is you've got to have squirrels. Right? Squirrels in the modern era are those that innovate data capture. They worry about new ways of capturing data. Right? They worry about new kinds of tech. They're the librarians, they're the data gatherers. Right? They are fundamental to helping you innovate the kind of data that you need to have going forward. Okay? The second type of animal is the owl, and the owl is the wise one. They're the ones that can span the digital and technology domain and the business domain and the consumer domain and understand the potential outcomes. Right? So they're the kind of visionaries, if you like, of this new data world. The third kind of animals are the wolves or the foxes. They're the cunning ones, the algorithmic geeks. They write that one little algorithm which gets some fantastic insight. Right? They're hunting packs. Right? So that's the kind of theorists, if you like, of the new digital world we're going into. The fourth type of animal is the weaver bird. And this is an often overlooked animal. It's a small bird, and they create these big nests to attract their mate. They're the data engineers. They worry about building things that are robust, reliable, secure, and all of those kind of aspects. Right? So they worry about engineering the system to really deliver the outcomes that you want to have. And the final set of animal is the hawks. They're the ones that fly high above. They worry about everything that's going on. They worry about the ethics, the privacy, and the legality. And that kind of data zoo, the animal zoo that we have, is the kind of skill sets that we have to think about going forward. And in there is the underlying value chain, right? Because what's emerging now is a digital value chain where data is being consumed, it's being manipulated and transformed, and it's creating new kinds of outcomes. And it's our ability to understand the emerging data value chain in our industries that will help us create the new value. So the challenge is, how do we create practical, useful techniques to understand the systems, but be able to translate that into something that's practical and usable for the individual who faces the problem of deciding the future. Okay.
Thank you. Please, a round of applause for all of the panelists. Very thought-provoking. I'd like to just turn it over to the audience in case there is a burning question. Rob, could we get a microphone to Rob? Thank you.
Thank you all. That was just an absolutely fascinating panel, and nice job, Ha, putting together this panel. I have a ton of questions, but I'm just going to ask one question that and I'll ask it to Nancy. I think it probably, there's sort of strands of it that run through what all of you have said. But this is a question about human capital at your firm. So you mentioned robotic process automation, natural language processing. You mentioned some other tools and techniques that you use. I guess one thing I'm curious about is, to what extent do you feel that you have to go out and hire people with those skills? To what extent can you train folks within your firm? I would just like to hear a little bit more about the actual human capital.
Yeah, so just a couple of reactions, just as I answer your question, is two things it was fascinating to listen to my colleagues here. A couple things I would say is that data is valuable, absolutely, and the person and the companies that control the data, have a huge role to play. But what we find over and over again is you have to know how to apply the insights from the data in a very pragmatic way. I mean, we win against IBM in real customer settings because we understand what the customer is trying to do. So we talk about use cases. You got to understand the use case and then apply the insight from the data there. That is more complicated than it looks, right? So I just would say that all of these disruptions that we've been talking about, I would say some of them take a lot longer to actually materialize in an industrial setting than you might think. Second thing I would say is that while data is again increasing its value, other things have become more valuable. It's really interesting. The top shareholder question I used to get in 2004, 2005 is, Google's going to eat your lunch. You're not going to be around because Google is going to eat your lunch. And if I look now, first of all, Google's a partner. They bring us customers. But second thing is, if you talk to my customers, they all Google. But what do they say? They say, I got too much information. I don't know what it means. Half the stuff is not right. So brands have become super important in this world of way too much information. And so I would just say that I agree that we're in kind of uncharted territory, but I would just ask you all who think about these things every single day to start to maybe envision what other attributes become as important or increase in importance relative to the fact that data is going to be the way that we work in the future. So I just wanted to sort of share those thoughts, but back to your question on human capital. A couple things. Today we have more technology folks that work for us than we have domain experts. So that's a huge change. It used to be sort of editorials ruled the company. And so what did we do? In some cases, jobs really did go away. And I think we've all said that, right? Things that we used to own printing plants. We used to do a lot of things that just don't happen today. Second thing we try and do is retrain people. So again, having this deep domain expertise, we're an IP company, so we are retraining. So right now, for example, because the single biggest gating factor to innovation is what are the use cases? We got plenty of data scientists, plenty of technology folks, we just don't always have the use cases. So we're actually going through now and training almost the entire, about a third of our workforce on what is AI, what is RPA, so that they can start to imagine, okay, how might I deploy these techniques? So we do a lot of retraining, and then we create a lot of centers of excellence. So we really think about, okay, how do we create tools? So we create a toolbox of all this technology, and then let individual companies and business units pull out of the toolbox and create. But I definitely, right now, we're in a phase where AI and all the newer technologies, they can't live independently of people. You need people to actually curate the algorithms and people to deploy it. But over time, I think you're going to see a phase where certain roles will be eliminated, and it's our responsibility to say, okay, as a society, how are we going to retrain those folks for something?
Can I just add something to that?
Sure.
So I have a very simple phrase that I use with my teams, and it's be digital or be digitized. And people have got on this curve of constantly learning and reimagining their role, redefining their job, because you're on a conveyor belt. Activities of your life, and even in the academic space, by the way, activities, what you do, will gradually get digitized. And it's your ability to stay ahead of that and understand what are the outcomes I'm going to try and create. How am I going to use those new digital technologies to help me create those new kind of outcomes? And that's kind of what you've got to do. And we do a huge amount of training, whether it's face-to-face or whether it's virtual training. We're constantly moving people along. And those that can't cope with that and don't want to cope with it, we have to find strategies for managing skills obsolescence. So at the Academy of Management conference last year, one of the sessions I ran is how do we cope with skills obsolescence? Because that is a massive issue. And it's a growing issue that we do need to help solve and address. So in our company, we're doing things like creating JVs, we're creating new kind of partnerships, new ways of creating new kind of roles. Massive sets of challenges, but we have to do more of that.
Again, thank you again very much for a fascinating presentation. I just had a quick remark. We keep seeing these very optimistic, a bit pessimistic views. It's wonderful, fantastic, versus our privacy is being taken off. Yeah, enjoyed your presentation. Annabelle corrected it. Don't get carried away, so to speak. So I was just wondering, to what extent is this affected by our biases? I mean, I do some work in autonomous driving, and it's interesting that there are about, 30,000 deaths per year caused by humans on roads. And we get outraged by 2 deaths by Tesla or autonomous car, we get, oh my God, this is unbelievable. So sometimes it's our perceptions of finding these things scary, etc., and to what extent these are biases, because statistically, autonomous driving is much safer. It will be much safer. And if humans make mistakes, machines will make fewer mistakes. So if that gets going, that's a good thing possible. So I wonder to what extent is this cognitively biased in terms of how we respond to disruptive innovations and their implications, societal and others. Both Pierre and Annabelle might have views, or anybody else on that.
Maybe Pierre, you might want to speak to top management biases as you work with clients.
It's a tough question. I mean, what I painted is actually not so optimistic, right? It looks optimistic, right? Because we would like to get to there, but I mean, nothing shows that we will get there, right? With the current state of the world. I mean, in order to get there, we would need a lot of different things to happen. Regulation, I mean, would have to happen. Would have to have say in all this. And I would love for a way to be able to get to this. I think we all need to strive, towards that. And I think it's only by pushing the boundaries that we are able to go in the right direction. But the path, to get to what I was painting is actually a daunting one.
So if I can add, so we don't know what we don't know, okay? And that's a kind of truism that we're all aware of. We have to have some brave souls that go and try these things out, whether it's a Tesla, whether it's Ford trying to do some new stuff, whether it's Daimler, everybody's going to have to try. And as we go into these, we've got to go in with our eyes opening, recognizing that there will be failures. And we've got to learn from those failures. Because if we accept that humanity in general is trying to do things for the betterment of humanity, which is kind of what really happens at the end of the day. And if it doesn't, then humanity gets up and stops it, right? So there's kind of self-regulation in humanity. So we have to let some of these things go ahead and learn from that and then pull back. But there will be unintended consequences. And as those unintended consequences become so great that we have to pull back further, those corrections will happen. So will Google go too far? Will Facebook go too far and get pulled apart? Maybe, right? We've seen what happened with Bell and become baby bells. There's mechanisms in society to regulate what society does. They'll kick in. Right.
I'll just take that.
Once again, thank you for the excellent presentations and the panel. As someone from IS field, this is a welcome change in other field who does not necessarily deal with technology all the time. I have just one comment and question to Pierre and Rashik. The comment is that the technology also has its own logic, and the reason that we do not have our earlier dreams of democratizing innovations and so on is because I believe some of these technology fundamental tools were designed to centralize the power. They were military tools to protect from nuclear warfare, so that they were designed to maintain command and control system when the things are broken. So it looks as if they're decentralized, but an underlying logic is to provide a centralized command and control. So I think we have to think about, maybe there is a different kind of technology logic, fundamentally different, if we indeed want to promote such different things. And also we should take technology logic very seriously. The question I'd like to ask is that, recently, while we are hearing all these wonderful excitements coming from the platform companies, we also hear the tragic failures of old traditional companies trying to become like digital platform. GE Digital decided to sell off their whole division. Used to be, we use it as a case study of this is how you should do it. Now, what do we do? And personally, a lot of folks who were in charge of digital transformation lost their job because they could not produce revenue soon enough. The board just does not have that 15 years of the patience to continue to put large scale of capital investment that is necessary to build a digital transformation. So the question that I have to two of you is that how do you deal with these clients? what do you say, and how? What are the techniques or methods to overcome such challenges?
I can start if you want. I think we need to start always with the use cases, right? As you were saying, right, that's where you get the value. And you need to start by trying to solve a use case, with applying technology, with applying also business sense, right? Because you need to find a solution which will actually create value. And we also need to think about the human experience, whether it's your customer experience or your employee experience. So it's by combining the technology side, the business side, and the experience side that you actually create value. And you're right. Your first comment was actually quite interesting on these technologies were created to survive a nuclear war, and in fact they're creating tools to centralize, and that's what we're seeing, right? We're seeing a couple of platforms that are controlling everything, and I think if we want to go to a different future where we can unlock a lot of value by cutting across the silos, we need to find other mechanisms, right? Maybe it should be a marketplace, right? A regulated marketplace that allows people to exchange their data because there's value in that, right? So we need to find these mechanisms, to enable the unlocking of all the value that can be created from this.
Yeah, so I think you captured a lot of the things there, but at the heart of this is solving a real problem that somebody really has. And whether you look at Adrian Slowitz's work around demand, creating products people love that didn't know they needed, and how you use hassle mapping, or whether you use uncertainty, or whether there's a whole bunch of techniques, but it's getting back into the real problem you're trying to solve. And then it's also thinking differently about how you go about creating that solution. And the work from, or the book by Stanley McChrystal, a book called Team of Teams, is if you've not read this, I'd urge you to read this, because this kind of underpins a lot of the disruption that we're seeing happening in the marketplace. And in there, he talks about the US Army and how they battled against Al-Qaeda. Okay. How could a rabble defeat aspects of a highly tuned, highly oiled, perfect weapon of destruction? Right? How did that happen? And what he talked about is the efficiency, the lack of effective decision-making at the point where it's needed, and the strive for efficiency and central control gets broken, right? So there are different ways, agile, different ways of thinking about organization, testing, and proving those models. So there's a number of different things you've got to do to seed those ideas in the marketplace and validate them. Once you know they're right and they're appropriate, how do you scale them before anybody else? And once you scale them, how do you then sustain your marketplace going forward? And so this notion of seed, scale, sustain is a big part of what we talk to most of our clients about. So how do you get those portfolio ideas that we can seed, whether it comes from client problems or supply chain problems that really embed that? Let's think about the different 5 patterns of what you're trying to do in terms of the underlying innovation logic that you're trying to apply. And then how do you validate that, scale that through a marketplace or ecosystems, and then sustain it going forward? And that's the kind of model we look at.
Well, I'm afraid we have run out of time. I want to thank the panelists again for coming, and of course you, the SMS members, for attending the session. I think some of them will stay a little bit and maybe take on one-on-one questions. Nancy, I know, has a plane to catch, but perhaps the other speakers might stay a little bit for chats. Thank you so much.